And then if I share the window, you should be able to see now. So what we want to be able to do today is just carrying on from, learning outcome 4, going to learning outcome 4 essentially. What we today want to do is understand how, an HR strategy is put into place. Now, in the first 3 learning outcomes of the unit, what we've done is, are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
So in the first part of the learning outcomes that we've done, which is learning outcome 1, 2, and 3, what we've done is we understand what is human resources or human HRM as a process. We've understood a bit of planning. We've done some detailing into understanding how planning is done. And then what we've done is we've also understood what is the legal and legislative requirement around human resources planning or human resources functions. So we understood roles and responsibilities, the different types of things which are involved in HR, the key functions, and in general, now we know. So if you have an HR department or you work within the HR, you know what your job is, you know how you need to look at putting policies and procedures in place, how they are then converted into monitoring and implementation of these procedures to help achieve the organizational vision. And then if you are working in the HR department, what are the key legislations from a country perspective? You could pick up a country. We have done UK, but you could pick up Nigeria, for example, or Argentina in this case. And you could pick up one country and then understand what are the legal requirements from a point of view of legislation which have to be followed and implemented within HR policies and procedures to make it workable for that location. Now, going forward, what we are going to try and do is look at understanding how a HR strategy is actually created, and then how this is linked into organizational strategy, and then how the strategy which is created, which is an HR plan, is actually then put into action, and how do you review or monitor this plan. So the idea is now having some background and knowledge about the different HR models, the framework, policies, procedures. What we want to now do is do a practical to understand how do we create a plan, an HR plan, how do we implement this plan, and how do we monitor this plan. Is that okay?
Okay.
So we will go through a couple of slides to understand, how this actually works. Now, one or two things before we start. The key will be that when we look at, say, a human resources plan within an organization, we always look at the organization in terms of its background, its aims and objectives. We look at the structure of the organization and also the culture of the organization. And accordingly, a plan is made, and then that plan is adapted and implemented within the organization. So a few slides, we want to focus on understanding the organizational structure, because if you see, this unit actually talks about strategic human resource management and organization behavior. So this part of the learning outcome from learning outcome 4 in OTHM's qualification combines both the understanding of impact of organizational strategy, structure, and culture on human resources management. So that is why what I've done is I've started the presentation off in the slides to look at quickly understanding the meaning of structure, and then we'll get into culture, and then we'll take it to HR and relate it to the HR strategies or a planning that we want to look at as an example. So let's define organizational design first. Now, what is, there are different types of structures we know. The structure of the organization can be functional, divisional, matrix, geographical, and departmental. These are different types of organizational structures that we are aware of. Now, when we look at these different types of structures, these structures, depending on the size, scale, and the operation of the organization, some of these structures are adapted and then implemented into the day-to-day working of the organization. So if I look at a multinational organization, like say, I'm going to pick up Microsoft, this organization has something called a functional structure, which is spread across different countries. Why do we say functional? Is because when we look at the organization's website, they classify their products as, and the teams as, gaming business, which is Xbox, web business, which is Bing or the search browser. You look at cloud, which is basically the software and the cloud virtualization software they have. Windows is a business or a product. So what they've done is, rather than have the organization follow a division structure saying that you have a CEO, president and all that, they prefer to kind of portray themselves as a functional structure in front of the market or in their customers. So if you have to get in touch with somebody, you have to call Bing, or the browser-based side of the business, or the gaming side of the business, or Windows side of the business, or mobile side of the business, which is Windows Mobile. Now this is a functional kind of a classification or structure which is implemented within this organization. When I look at Google, again, they have product or functional structure, because you have Google as a search engine, which is one organization. And then what they've done in the last year is they've created a group organization or a company called Alphabet, which is all the holdings of the group company. So Google is also a part. There are lots of other companies which they own, and they're all under the umbrella of Alphabet. So again, the structure is functional. So organizational design, or the structure in which the categorization of employee staff and the offices and departments is done, is important to understand, and this helps the manager create specific type of policies and processes within the organization. Now, if I look at Army or Armed Forces, you will normally see that there is a matrix structure, because you have somebody, a general at the top, and then underneath the general you have different people, and they have to take orders from the top. So this kind of structure is matrix. If you look at, say, for example, sometimes we do say that the organization is a flat structure. That means it could be a small organization wherein, the CEO, everybody has access to the managing director or the CEO of the organization, and there are not many tiers in the structure. That means you have manager and employee, you have manager, general manager, employee, and more or less the structure is flat. So the organizational design, the way the structure of the organization is put and created, influences what kind of culture you will see in the organization. Now, going back to the example of armed forces which I've given, there the culture of the organization is autocratic. That means the orders from the top means everything. There is no other left and right or deviation from that. Some of the cases when you will see, we look at understanding the 4 different types of management and leadership styles kind of relate to the organizational structure of the organization. You have autocratic, democratic, laissez-faire, and these kind of styles, when we look at, they kind of tell us something about the organization. So where we clearly want to know is that these factors, which is the structure and how the structure is made within the organization, influences the culture of the organization as well. Now, when we look at setting up a structure, what are the factors which affect it? There could be something called the environment or external factors which affect. Sometimes it is to do with technology. And then in some cases, we look at human resources, which is one of the key wings, and how the overall objectives. So when I say strategy, here I mean is overall goals and objectives of the organization are set. And all these 4 factors contribute to creating the structure, right? Sometimes you will see that there's a new team being formed. So always the CEO or the managing director will have the HR manager sit in the meeting and say, okay, are you comfortable with the structure? Are you comfortable with the headcount? Are you okay with the costs associated with in terms of salaries and perks? So they have to take an opinion from HR, and HR's function is key to the formation of a structure of the organization. Sometimes you will see technology playing an important part, because if you have remote offices, branch offices, regional offices, if they are not connected to the head office, there is no way that that operation would be successful. So in this case, technology plays an important part in terms of how the structure of the organization is. Come again, sorry?
The screen, the slides are really tiny here.
Tiny here, okay. I can expand the screen. Is it better?
Okay, this is better.
Okay, great. So basically, you look at that side of things. What you tend to see is that the structure of the organization has some factors which affect it, and technology could be one of the factors. Now, external environment could be one of the factors, which is to say that as an example, the external factor could be that how is the structure in comparison to competition? How is the structure in comparison to, sometimes you have to look at legislation, like a lot of big organizations which are Apple, Microsoft, Google. You look at all the American big companies, Unilever, Procter & Gamble. These companies, they have operations in 190, or 160 plus countries. Now, when you look at such global scale, what tends to happen is that the environment in which they work also affects how the organization functions, how the profits are booked, how's the accounting done, and that kind of thing also then looks at influencing organizational structure. Now, in such organizations, you will see that, maybe the head office keeps all the accounting functions or the payroll side of things or legislation side of things are centralized to one department. And that is done in order to have effective control on the structure of the organization. And then goals and objectives are defined in the strategy. Now, quickly going through some of these slides, because having to understand the background in terms of why structure and culture is important, we have to relate this to HR. Now, these points have been explained. So organizational environment means the changes which are happening, the problems which manage, changes in legislation. If you're in finance, you might have an exchange rate changing, fluctuation in the currency exchange rates. And in those cases, the managers have to work with, different departments and different people in different locations to be able to manage some of those issues. And that is why, you will see that sometimes organizational environment also has to be flexible to have decentralized decision making done in order to move it forward. Now, example here would be a simple thing is that you are an international company, you place a lot of orders to China or import a lot of material from China, but most purchase managers look at placing orders when the exchange rate is high. But in order to avoid this, sometimes they come to an agreement that, okay, our exchange rate is going to be based on a dollar. The payments are going to be done in dollar as a currency, international dollar, US dollar as a currency. And this rate is going to be a fixed rate for the whole month rather than have it on a daily basis changing. So in order to have this decision making done, there is a lot of decentralized, power given to the managers or basically purchasers or sources, as we call them, which are sitting in China, but also doing buying for the head office of the company globally. Similarly, when you look at strategy, we look at strategy wherein different strategies, are created to work in different type of structures. So here you will see sometimes there is something called, if the company wants to expand and they want to diversify, they would look at, a horizontal integration or a vertical integration. Horizontal integration means that if you are owning the supply chain, you will try and own everything which is required to be produced in that product, forward and backward. Vertical would mean you would look at, sourcing parts from suppliers, and if those suppliers can be brought into the supply chain and owned by the company, then that would be, vertical integration. Sometimes some companies look at diversifying. So if you look at Facebook initially started off, as a organization which basically connects friends and families and things like that. But they've gone into and acquired other companies like Snapchat. They've gone and acquired WhatsApp, which is to look at, chatting. So they have diversified their business from not just being a friendship or, a network relations company, but they've diversified into other services as well. And the reason for diversification is to have more revenue, more growth. Advertising, for example, they never thought of advertising 10 years back when it started, but the advertising is the main part of the driver of the revenue. So they've gone into advertising, selling products like eBay and Amazon, if you have a Facebook account. And some of these things are part and parcel of the business, but because they involved something they are not initially planned to do, and it's something diverse than what they had initially planned out when the company started from the vision, is diversification. But if it was something like you are a company which is a networking company like LinkedIn, they ended up acquiring lynda.com, and lynda.com was a vertical integration because they said because we have so many professionals in the network and training and development comes naturally. So they ended up acquiring lynda.com, and that brought in the training and development into the side of the business, and that was vertical integration. So depending on the strategy, you will see sometimes the structure of the organizations change. And because as organizations become big, you will sometimes also see that the organizations have a mixture of structures. So maybe the head office, they have a matrix structure, but when you look at regional offices or other international locations, there the structure could be functional. That means the person is actually working within the country, but also reporting to the head office because he's a product manager, or for example, he's an HR manager, he's reporting into the group HR manager in a particular geography, and that group HR manager is reporting into the head office. So if you look at a company like Vodafone, a company which is present all across in Europe, you will see that each division of the company in UK, Ireland, Germany, France, Italy, they have operations on a full-scale basis. So here the HR manager reports into the Western Europe HR head office, and Western Europe reports into the UK head office. So here what you will see is, according to the strategy, you will see reporting happening. They work within their own country, but for purposes of reporting, monitoring, and policy and procedure sharing, they also report into the head office. Similarly, technology and the four pillars that I've explained, which is how we look at human resources. Now let's start relating this to how the structure and the culture of the organization is influenced and how the policy making is done from a point of view of HR. Now, sometimes you will see within the organization some decisions are made because they want to get the best employee and the talent to come in and work for them. So here they would hire workers which are primarily coming from outside the domain. An example here would be, like in the UK, what tends to happen is if the company cannot find useful resources or fill the vacancies up from within UK, they are then advertising to Europe, and they then get an opportunity to basically say, okay, because you're a part of the EU, you can also have people in France, or if you find a good resource in Germany, that resource could come in and work for the company, and you can get manpower recruitment done from within Europe. Sometimes you will see if the workers are not available even within Europe, then they try and advertise through firms outside EU, and they get people from different countries to come in and work in the head office. And in those cases, the HR department ends up sponsoring visas. And you have to look at international legislation, and that would mean that you are trying to recruit somebody from outside a particular legislation. And in order to comply, some cases you will see that sometimes people have to be recruited from outside, and you have to look at visas and regulations and other things as well. A simple example in the case here would be in the UK, like National Health Service, NHS. 40% of the doctors in the NHS are actually, or were actually, not initially British, because when NHS was faced with the shortage of doctors, went to a lot of different countries to recruit doctors. They went to EU, they went to Far East, Indian subcontinent, America, and you will see 40% of the workforce, when they came in, were actually highly skilled workers. They were doctors and, chartered accountants or other things, related to this as an example. And they then, immigrated or migrated under the scheme and became a part and parcel of the UK. But the HR department within the NHS had to then look at visas and other things, which meant in order to create and fill that shortage, the HR department had the mandate from the government to say you could recruit up to so many doctors from abroad if you can't find or fill vacancies from within the UK. And this is still the case. So because of Brexit, we have 55,000 workers which might end up leaving the NHS. They are from Europe and other countries. And because of visa regulations, the government has now created a scheme wherein they are saying we will need to recruit 5,000 doctors. 3,000 will come from within EU and 2,000 will come from outside the EU. And that means the structure of the organization will change, and the human resources department has to be flexible enough to be able to accommodate that demand for doctors which are required within the NHS. Now let's look at the other side of the coin. Now, when we know the structure and understand what is the impact the structure and culture creates, the HR department has to do its basic job and basic functions. So they need to look at things like job design, which means creating job description, what kind of jobs the people will specifically do, what kind of results they will produce, and how these results will be, appropriately appraised or, tabulated. So sometimes you will see that job description, the basic starting point for HR managers is to, if there is a new vacancy which comes up, then the basic starting point for them is to look at creating a job design, which is basically job description for that role. Now, you also come across terms like job enlargement and job enrichment. What does job enlargement mean? Enlargement means you're getting more responsibility, or you're getting to share the burden of responsibility and getting promoted. And in this case, your job essentially remains the same, but you will have a larger responsibility within that role. So if you're a department manager, what will happen is if the number of employees increase, you will, as an HR manager, you will also have a requirement to have somebody work within the team who will essentially manage that increased number of workers for performance appraisal, everything. So enlargement would mean that, the number of things that you're doing or the task that you're doing is basically, or the responsibility that you have is growing, and that would mean enlargement. What is enrichment? Enrichment means that you are getting more powers into the same role in a way. That means if you are a manager and you were responsible for making day-to-day decisions, but the financial side of decisions were done by the managing director. But because he's now got confidence on you and the decisions that you're making, at some stage he adds the decision-making responsibility of a certain budget, say up to certain value, you could make the decisions. So what he has done is he's increased the responsibility in terms of adding that function of financial decision-making to your existing role, and that would mean a bit of job enrichment. Sometimes you will see that workers within the company or managers within the company are put into training and development because they are seen as leaders in the making, and company then likes to invest in those leaders or on those resources to turn them into leaders by giving them the opportunity to do different functions within the department. So in some cases you will see that if you worked in sales or marketing for 10 years, what they want to do is you've been identified as one of the leaders in the organization to take up senior positions. What they will do is they will rotate you into different functions. And those functions would mean that apart from having responsibility of sales or marketing, you also have responsibility for business development. You also have responsibility for, say, account management, and you manage a certain number of people under that team. And that would mean that your job is being increased, enriched, so that you have experience within the other fields as well. Is that okay?
Yes, please.
Okay, now let's look at sometimes when we understand the whole process of, the job description, job rotation, job enlargement, job enrichment, what we need to be able to do is understand where all these things actually fit in. And what we come across to is something called job characteristics. And job characteristics, job characteristics.
Okay.
Right, we look at this first, characteristics. Now, job characteristics means what kind of job you do. What are the kind of skills which are required to be able to do that job? What is the output you are able to produce, and how much autonomy can be given in that role? Should you be given that particular role or that job to do? So job characteristics are defined on these, 4 or 5 parameters. So if you work as a plumber, for example, or if you work as, say, a payroll manager within the organization, now what are the skills that you require to process the payroll every month? You need to be having some training on accounting. You need to be having training on understanding how payroll actually works, and maybe the software which is required to process the payroll. So here, you're expected to have some wide variety of skills. That means apart from being a human resources manager, you will also have a good experience and knowledge about accounting because you are going to be payroll. Now, when you look at task identity, this is something which means that you should be able to understand the job from start to finish. You should be able to understand what are the key things required, what phases of, what are the types of smaller jobs which are required to be able to achieve the overall objective. So here, you're involved in, identifying all the tasks which are related to the job, and you have to understand the process from start to the end or from beginning to the end. Task significance is how the worker actually feels in the organization. When you work and you deliver something as an objective, as a responsibility, you feel proud about it. Do you feel that my work that I do on a day-to-day basis contributes towards the overall objective achievement of the organization? Do you feel valued as a worker? So how important do you feel your work is in the organization? Then autonomy steps in is that when you've been working in the organization for a number of years, you have been comfortable with that role, you have been performing, what managers tend to do is they build something called autonomy in your role or in your job description, which is to say that you have the freedom to be able to make certain decisions. You have the freedom to be able to schedule the tasks the way you want. So like departmental heads or people who are line managers who manage a number of staff or supervise a number of staff normally have the autonomy function in their job characteristic. That means they can delegate a particular job to an employee. They can choose to review the work of a particular employee, terminate, say, for example, employment in some cases, and also then have the ability to be able to rotate people in a particular job role. And then you have last function, which is feedback, which basically says how the worker gets information about, whether the job has been done well, has been, he's performed well in that role, or has the worker not been able to perform, what kind of feedback that the worker is able to get. And that feedback bit of thing is something which is related to, your job characteristic. Now, if we go back and now look at this chart, what we do is we see job characteristics is a combination of skills, how well you identify your task, understand the significance of your task. That means if you do not complete your job properly, then what kind of an impact will it have on the overall achievement of the objective, or somebody else's work, which is dependent on when you complete their start. Autonomy and feedback. So then they look at mapping it into something called physiological states. That means how mature is the employee, what kind of experience does the employee already have, and if given the experience and the skills and the knowledge that the employee has, they then should be able to produce meaningful work, achieve the objective, essentially have or take or shoulder the burden of responsibility or decision making, and then have the appropriate knowledge to be able to bring up other workers within the organization to take up that role, or kind of coach and mentor the people to be able to take that role. And this then determines what is called the motivation that you have for the job, how much of job satisfaction that you get at the end of the day, at the end of the week, month, year, when you are working in that role, and what is your output. That means, are you a performing employee? Are you an underperforming employee? Are you an average employee? So performance appraisal at some point in time gets linked to the overall job characteristic or your job description. So sometimes the organization has to take a decision to say, okay, we are going to be not renewing your contract, and that would mean that they look at your performance, they look at your motivation, they look at your contribution to the overall objective, and if they feel that you're falling short of what has been described in your job characteristic or your job description, then they choose to do away with your contract or not renew your contract. Is that okay?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Now, let's look at quickly some slides on relevance of culture. So far what we've done is we've understood structure. Now let's understand and relate culture to HR side. Now, organizational culture.
Okay.
Right? So we understood that the structure of the organization can have an impact on your job design, your job description, what kind of jobs can you do, how can you get promoted by job enlargement or job enrichment, and then at the end of it, how is that condition related to the overall performance of the employee in terms of job characteristics, output, and the motivation factors. Let's understand organizational culture. Now, what is culture? Culture is nothing but a set of shared beliefs, expectation, values, which the organization thrives on. So sometimes you see that when you go for interviews, you will hear these terms from the HR managers. They say that we are very passionate about what we do on a day-to-day basis. Our employees are quite passionate about what they create. And these kind of terms you get to hear from, sometimes when you hear of or read about organizations in the news, is that we are very passionate to bringing out, products which are result driven. We are very passionate to bring out products which actually change people's life. So when you look at innovative companies, when I say innovative companies which are introducing new kind of products which are simplifying our lives, like mobile phone, the invention of mobile phone, the invention of internet. When you look at vacuum cleaners, all these kind of things have simplified our daily life to a certain extent. Now, these organizations which produce these products or come out with these services have actually a set of beliefs, expectation, and values, and they then form the ethos of the organization. Now, that is something which is directly related or directly that has a direct relation with culture of the organization, because here they expect, if they hire employees, they expect you to behave in a certain way. If they hire people to work within different positions, they expect those people to kind of exude and exhibit those characteristics which are similar to the culture of the organization. That means a caring culture, say for example, a developing culture, or a culture which is quite cohesive in the sense that it promotes team building and cohesion within the work, and every worker takes pride in the output that they achieve or create, and that then moves the organization forward to achieve its goal. So the culture is nothing but a set of beliefs, expectation or values, and these are things which are actually also sometimes defined in the vision and the mission of the organization, and they influence HR policies, because basis which sometimes you will see that organizations will form policies which are related to the culture of the organization. And I'll give you a simple example here. When we look at Google as an organization has a very friendly culture towards its employees. The reason is they say that we create software, and if we not have the right people or the most intelligent, intellectual people in the organization, then as a company, we will not be able to come out with products or solutions which will have an impact on people's life when they use our products. So they have created an HR policy wherein if you are, say for example, a simple, one of the things which I'm going to pull out from their policy and give you an example is, if you're working for Google and assuming you are faced with an uncertain condition in the sense that you are diagnosed with certain things which are life-threatening, or if it leads to your death while you're working within the organization, and that could be because of any reason. What Google does is it underwrites, it says that we will provide free education to your children till the age of 15. Your partner or your surviving partner will actually receive a pension till the time the partner lives or continues to live, and that is a contribution which the Google HR makes towards that person. So accidents can happen. We have no control on in terms of our lives, but sometimes if these kind of mishaps happen, then Google as an organization, from its HR practices and policies, has a culture which is seen as a very people-friendly culture towards its own employees. So they have things like restaurants, gym. They say if we can make the lives of our employees more easy or less stressful, then they feel that people can perform much more and give much more to the organization. So the building of things like, even they have laundrettes and washing machines, showers, cubicles. You can bring your kids to the office, and the fancy creation of those things within the office are all done from an organizational culture point of view, is because as a company they want to portray that we are a very people-friendly company rather. And as a company, I think they're ranked in the top 10 most friendly employers in the world. And that is why the culture of the organization is such, which basically influences, and when they hire people, they look at the same set of beliefs, values, which you can relate to, which is a part and parcel of the Google's HR policies or HR structure of the organization. Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
Here we looked at the structure. Culture is formed or has kind of impacts or factors like employment relations, organizational structure, what are the ethics, and then what kind of members are present within that organization, existing employees within the organization, and these kind of things influence the culture of the organization. So let's look at each of them explained in a particular slide. So here we talk about, like, when I say characteristics of organizational members, it means is that what the company believes is that people make up the company, people make up the organization. If it's the people because of which the business is there, if staff is not working in the company would not be a company. So they see people as a source of defining, as a starting point for defining the culture in the organization. And what they do in this case is that they try and make the staff, the employees, as comfortable as possible in the organization, so that they can develop a very congenial, very relaxed culture of the organization in general. Ethics are related to what you call the morals and beliefs and values that the company has. And in some cases, you will see the company tagline, the tagline of the company, wherein the brand line would say, just to relate this, if you look at some of the taglines of the company, like I'm just going to give you an example of, say, for example, if it says ASDA, for example, which is a Walmart, it says always low prices. So it's a big retailer in Europe, and obviously what it does is its tagline is always low prices. Now here, the ethics and the culture and the beliefs of the organization is, if we can bring products which are quality products at low prices for our customers, they will come and shop more in ASDA. Now Tesco's, which is another company that I've taken as an example in the earlier sessions, is again one of the big retailers present in 14 different countries. They say every little helps. That means their aim is also to every little helps.
Okay.
So their aim and objective is also to look at, bringing new products or, services to its customers, which will help make the life of people easier who shop at Tesco's. So most companies, when you see, they have some sort of a tagline, and those taglines are nothing but, the ethics of the organization to a certain extent, and the beliefs which they, prosper on or thrive on. Now, when we relate this to HR, what does this mean for HR? Now, sometimes you will see that when these factors are included or considered for incorporation, they help and influence the development of policies, because the organization wants to see and portray a certain image, both from its structure and cultural point of view, and those then need to be documented in terms of policies. If somebody is to read it or understand it, they need to be similarly interpreted so that they are then understood by one and all working within the organization in the same manner. And those tend to be, the linking points or creation points for HR policies. So human resources policies can influence how the organization defines basically how the organization will go about achieving the goals, what are the kind of resources the organization will provide to its employees to achieve those goals, and if they are not achievable, then what are the reasons or the mechanisms they will put in place to make sure that it does not create unnecessary stress or burden on the employees if those goals are not achievable, but look at the ways in which they can be made achievable, and those are then all defined in the policy. So example here would be, if there is an accident which happens in the manufacturing facility, then there is a policy which clearly says that under the Health and Safety Act, if this has happened, then it needs to be reported to the health and safety officer. If it is an injury which causes bodily harm or threat to the employee's welfare, then that needs to be logged with the health and safety executive. So what they tend to do is on an annual basis, they monitor the number of accidents or mishaps happening, and at some stage that triggers an inspection to say that, okay, the working facilities are not safe for its employees. And then they put an action plan in place or find the organization or the company to say that, okay, you're not able to provide, a safe environment to your workers. And that then helps to develop, policies, because these checks and measures put into place help define how things are going to be managed, within the organization. So in general, when we look at the culture and the structure of the organization, influence the development of HR policies within an organization. An example that I'm going to take just to relate and close this as a point would be, if we take a centralized structure, that means everything in the organization is based in the head office, then here you will see that people have less autonomy. That means if you have lots of branch offices or satellite offices, regional offices, the head office makes all the decisions. So that means there is no decision-making power available with local offices. Here, if it's a centralized or structure of the organization, what you will see is that people tend to be generally cautious, and they tend to obey the rules and regulations set in order to be not seen as offending or being on the wrong side of the policies and procedures. And because it's a centralized structure, what you will tend to see is that because everything is controlled by the head office, they have a good amount of predictability and stability in terms of what goals will be achieved. So if you are a small enough business, or when I say it's an organization working within a country, most of the structures you will see will have a centralized structure. Like, let's take an example of a company like Nestle. which produces lots of different products. But Nestle UK has a centralized structure because what they tend to do is their head office will have all the authoritative making, like marketing will be centralized, promotions are centralized, accounting, payroll, HR is centralized, and then they have regional offices in the UK, which will all be dependent on the head office to perform their functions. So here in this case, at the end of the year, because policy structure and everything is centralized within the head office, there is a bit of a stability or kind of predictability in the business operations and what is the kind of turnover the organization will achieve, or what kind of goals and objectives which should be met, will be easy for the head office to predict and arrive to. Now, in organizations wherein there is flat and decentralized, you will see that means the organization is very big. Sometimes decentralized structure would mean that you have, when you look at, say, Apple as a company, they are based in the head office, in the US, but you will see Apple also has subsidiary companies which are all a part of a group company. Similar example of Google. So Google normally is based in the US, but Google has a lot of regional offices, Google UK, Google India. They have lots of people and employees working there, and there the structure to manage that side of resources, human resources, in particular employees, is decentralized because decisions have to be taken in that country. Pay structure has to be local. It can't be that the people in, say, for example, India will be getting salary in dollar. All the people employed by Google in UK will get salaries in dollars. They'll have to be paid in pounds. And in those cases, we would see the decentralized structure works because there is local decision-making power available, and the managers in those locations have the control to take decisions or make decisions and have control over the operations of the company. So here, what they tend to do is the culture of the organization is a bit flexible because not all decision-making goes to that office for signing or achieving. Each side of the geography, in terms of each geography of the organization, wherever they have functions, have then set their own goals, and these goals help in the overall achievement of the group goals or the company's head office goals. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, hi.
Hello.
Hi, Oleg. Yeah, hi. So an example that I would give you, yeah, go ahead.
Hello.
Yeah, go ahead. I can hear you.
Okay. I wanted to ask. So you said in the previous slide, please.
Yes.
The decentralized structure, it means that maybe the employees can come up with their own ideas, and as far as it fits into the organization's goals, it is allowed.
Yes. So if I have to give you an example of this, it would be that, say, let's look at a company which has operations in, say, different countries. Now, if we look at, let's put it this way, in terms of what I can think of is, if I come up with an example like, let's look at Walmart or ASDA, which is basically present in the UK and has about 2,000 stores. Now, what they can sell to the consumers in this market is going to be decided by the head office because the preferences of the consumers in terms of, let's look at, what season is it, what kind of groceries available, what kind of clothes people would want to wear. Here, the decision making will have to be local or decentralized because if I compare this to maybe some other countries like Australia, for example, where they are also present, but Australia is having winters right now. So their promotions, their, decision making will have to be basis the products that they have to provide, which are seasonal products or, products which are catering to that particular market. But if that decision making is not decentralized, what that would mean is, as a company, they cannot say that we'll sell summer clothes in the UK now, whereas in Australia it is winter. So in those cases, in such companies, the decision making is decentralized because the managers in those locations will be able to have the freedom to come up with what is right for that market and then accordingly, look at setting goals and objectives.
Okay, so it is broken down to the managerial level of maybe each region, not like the lower level, the individual. For instance, you give the issue, the example of the Walmart, maybe in the UK and in Australia, where they're selling summer clothes. So it's not like the staff or the person in, maybe collecting money or whatever can come up with a decision on his own for the company. It has to be.
That's correct. So basically, if you not go down in that much of nitty-gritty, but the head office of UK as the head office UK or Walmart head office UK will make decisions for UK as a geography stores. And in the stores, the general manager will have a certain amount of freedom in the decentralized structure to say, okay, I know that in this market I sell so many pints of milk, but as compared to London as a market, there's so much requirement in terms of pints of milk. So they'll be able to regulate those requirements. I don't want 2,000 liters, I want only 200 liters because the market. Slightly breaking up.
Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
Another example, I'll simplify an example. So if you look at certain countries like Toyota or Nissan produces cars and sells them worldwide, but you will see that in certain countries it's a left-hand drive and in certain countries it is right-hand drive. So some models will have certain types of customization which will suit that market. Because if I'm selling a car in a market which is primarily a tropical market, there the requirement of air conditioning in the car would be more than heating. But in certain markets, you will see that there'll be more requirement and tests to be done for heating because it's a colder climate as compared to a summer climate. So here, the company is based in head office of Toyota, maybe based in Japan, but because the regional offices are working in different countries, they have a bit of a decentralized structure and a decision-making process, which allows them to adapt the product to the culture and the the type of market in which they are functioning and offering these products and services.
Okay.
Is that clear now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. So let's look at some of the other things which are related to now. We have a clear understanding of why is it important. Now, if I have to wear a HR manager's hat, if I say I become an HR, I get a job next tomorrow and I am appointed as the HR manager of the company, the first thing as a HR person, what I will do is I will go in, and if I just ask you to visualize this process, would be that you go in first day, you meet a lot of people in the organization. What you're trying to do as a person joining in the new position would be to try and understand what is the culture of the organization, what kind of structure it has, what is the hierarchy of the structure, who's the boss, how things are moving in the organization. And you'll pick up certain things which are to do with the ethics, the morals, the values. For example, do you see people offering each other a cup of coffee? You will see that it's a friendly atmosphere. You will see that the employees are allowed to take short breaks, after some periods of work. There are designated areas for smoking. You will see that there is a cleanliness, there's a cleaner in the organization. So loads of observation you will do on the first few days that you're working as an HR manager. And why you're making these observations is because you are trying to understand how the organization works, what is the ethos, what are the ethics, how the culture is, what the culture is, and how do people currently work with each other by kind of interactions and talks that you will do to pick this up. And parallelly, as a new employee joining in the department, you will be asked to go through some of the documentation, like an employee handbook. You'll be given certain policies and procedures. Maybe the IT person will come and set you up on your desk, your PC, your laptop, and you'll be allocated maybe a phone and all those things. And this will help you form a picture or a certain type of impression in your mind that I've joined the right company, or I've joined the company wherein there are so many things which work, and obviously this gives you a very positive image about that company. But your point of observation of all these things is to understand the culture and the structure of the organization and how the organization is actually working. What are the ethics? What are the values? What are the morals? And how do people interact with each other? And this is what you're trying to understand. Correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So when we do all this, what we want to at some stage do is understand how, as an HR manager, you put a strategy in place. How do you come up with a plan? And when we look at planning, what kind of things that you include in that planning so that it then becomes an effective strategy. Now, the reason of calling it a strategy is that this is something that you document once, and then once it is documented, you are able to then use it time and again to achieve objectives or set goals. And these goals and objectives, when it is set, it helps you achieve those things, and that, because it's something which is long term, is then called strategy. So what is the word strategy? Strategy is nothing but when you try and relate something, or identify something for long-term basis to be able to achieve goals and objectives, is the word strategy. Now, if I combine this with the term human resources strategy, what you're trying to do in human resources strategy would be to basically look at, how the plan is put together, from a point of view of resource management, so that the organization is able to achieve the objectives by including things like financial requirements, material requirements, resources requirement, and overall, this then helps the organization achieve, the goals. Simple thing would be a sales goal. Organization says, I want to achieve this much in terms of turnover this year. Then the HR comes into play and says, okay, for achieving this, you need this, which could mean you need 2 more employees in sales, you need 1 employee in this, you need some infrastructure environment, you need a local office, and all that forms a part of an expansion strategy, which at some stage will be called, the expansion strategy of the company. But within that, you have HR, you have sales, marketing, accounting, administration, operations, everything going into it to ensure that actually works. So what we want to now do is understand how you put a strategy in place, how do you create that plan, and why is it important, and how is it created. So when we look at overall HR strategy, the overall strategy basically, or a plan, is with something which defines how the organization will meet its responsibilities. Now, we don't want to quantify responsibilities in terms of financial, material. We want to say how it meets its responsibilities. And because you're talking about human resources, how does the organization meet responsibility towards its employees? As simple as that. Because if I'm responsible for HR, my clear role would be human resources or human relations, HR relations. How does my job directly help achieve the objectives which are required for, the employees? So that is basically to do with HR. If it was marketing strategy, that means you would have looked at marketing, promotion, sales, market share, and how it helps the organization achieve market share at the end of the year. If it was finance strategy, you would look at cost savings, you would look at expansion, diversification, and each of these would be then within the area of finance. So in the case of HR, it is to do employees. Now, when we look at requirement and procedures, we talk about things which are required for the people in the organization to work effectively, and they should have all the things required for them to be able to work. And the HR needs to ensure that the legal side of requirements are met. We talked about the national minimum wage, the disability, act. We talked about things like discrimination. All those things are a part and parcel of HR, all your HR strategy. Now, if you look at things like what is a policy, just to refresh, a policy is it's a set of guidelines which, once written, can be followed and generalized and applied to any part of the organization which deals with human resources or deals with a certain type of actions which are taken again and again. So I gave an example yesterday, which was a literal example of if the kids like ice cream, the mother in the house or the father in the house actually teaches them how to get to the ice cream, how to make the ice cream. And what you do is you define the policy that this is the steps you will take to be able to get to the ice cream or make the ice cream. So policies and procedures are basically put into place so that they can be used again and again. They are documented and they always yield the same kind of result when they are kind of put into practicality or put into practice. So in terms of looking at what are the key things that you will look at when you formulate a policy? What are the key bullet points? If you say I'm formulating an HR policy, what are the headings you will include? So things like consideration, who all are going to be in the set, what is the equity, that means what is the sanctity of that policy, what are the things that you would take into account would be things like, is it the audience to which it is going? The policy will look at incorporating audience from chief executive, the top person in the organization, to the lowest worker in the organization. So it needs to mandate that whatever role you do in the organization, you will be treated with respect. And that is where the communication has to be put in such a place, has to be taken into such, has to take into account what kind of wording and tone of the language has to be put in order to create that policy or procedure. Then sometimes you'll see and hear the word lessons have to be learned. We use these phrases again and again is because some of these things, even after putting into practice, do not yield the same results. So organization has to quickly learn from its lessons. The lessons have to be learned and they have to quickly move on. But in terms of learning, if they feel that the skills requirement is not meeting the required target or objective, then the organization has to put training and development into place. So an organization has to be a learning organization. That means regular programs on training and development have to be done for the employees for them to have skills which are required for them to do their job. Now, in any policy, when you create any strategy that you create, you have to also look at performance appraisals. You have to look at, how do you appraise the performance of the individuals, having given them a job description, and then what kind of quality of work life they have when they work. Are they being, HR side of things look at the welfare of the organization and also the welfare of the employees. So one of the key aspects of human resources is welfare, and that means that the HR policy should create a balance between work and life. That means personal and professional side of things when people work within the organization or business, and that is where the quality of work life comes. And last but not the least, which is related to work conditions. So the HR policies have to ensure that anything which is being asked of the employees to do, they have, what you call suitable work conditions, for, working, and they have all the details and implements, instruments or implements available to be able to perform in their job. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know, are you sharing your screen? Because the only thing I've been seeing here since we started lecture is factors affecting organizational structure.
Factors affecting organization.
That's the only thing I've been saying since we started. I think I could hear you changing the slides and everything, but I'm not seeing anything since.
1 second. How is it possible? 1 second. Let me just.
Okay, I'm just seeing HR policy value addings.
Yeah, so basically my screen was shared, just unshared it quickly and then shared it back, because sometimes what might happen that it might get, maybe slightly, if it doesn't refresh, let me know, because I think the screen is definitely shared, but sometimes maybe the refresh is not happening at your end. So basically what I've done, I think the last slide that you saw, I don't know which was the last slide you saw, but
the last slide I saw is what I told you. That the first thing you opened when we started, factors affecting organizational structure.
This one. So we've actually gone.
Yes, the diagram. Yes.
Yeah. So we've gone from there to the.
Whoa, you've gone really far.
Yeah, so we've gone through like almost on this slide now.
At some point, I was asking myself that you're explaining things, but I'm not seeing them on the screen.
All right, okay. Maybe it's just the refresh has not happened, but I'm glad that you've told me how. So in any case, we'll have a copy of this presentation. But I'm glad that you've shared, so I can refresh the screen. Hopefully, you should be able to see it now. Now, going to what we're discussing again, just going back to the point wherein we are looking at how the HR policy is formed. We look at, certain things are put in the slides, which I'll go to now, and those will be to start looking at when you start to formulate an HR strategy or a policy. Basically, strategy is the bigger word, and then comes policies and procedures, And then we see a lot of other things that we will talk about in terms of how a plan is made, how an HR strategy is made. So sometimes you will see within the organization that every new financial year, the organization departments, they end up making, say for example, an annual strategy. In the case of finance department, they'll make a financial strategy in terms of cost, budgeting, cash flow. In the case of HR, they will make a policy which is to bring across some new changes, training and development, new employment opportunities, promotions, performance appraisals, things like that. And if you look at any other department, they will also come up with, individual strategies, which will be nothing but, objectives and goals which they are looking at accomplishing in that particular year. So I put together a number of slides just to explain those explicitly in terms of how do we look at a goal. Now, one of the key things could be that if the organization business is not going well, and I'm going to concentrate on HR side, would be that they would have an overall strategy which the CEO will say that we need to look at a reduction in the number of headcount. That means we need to reduce the number of people working within the organization. So here, the CEO has given a very specific goal or an objective to say that we want to reduce the headcount by certain percentage, by 2 or 3%, or maybe say it might give a number like 200 if there are 2,000 employees. And the reason why this has been done is because they want to save on costs. And this is a very specific goal which has been given to HR, that you have to identify resources which are not performing well, are not meeting the targets, and we need to, kind of make those employees redundant. And that is number reduction in the number of people working within the organization. Now, the HR department cannot then say, okay, the HR manager cannot go ahead and say, okay, I don't want this, I don't like this employee, we'll take this out, or we'll fire the employee. What they have to do is, in order for them to do have structured decision making, they again go back to something called the job description, and the job description actually tells them the goals which have been set in terms of the the roles and responsibilities of the employee. So the goal setting is very key to an HR strategy, because if I do not specify to somebody in the organization, this is what you have to achieve by the end of this month or by the end of the year, or do not give a target, there is no way that you can evaluate that target at the end of the year. If you have not given any objectives or not defined any goals, then there is no way that you can evaluate, how the performance of that employee has been during the course of the year. So we look at goal setting in general, and the basis of goal setting is something which I think you must have heard. We use something called SMART, and I'm going to come across to a slide which is called SMART. Now, this is something which has become now a very common practice, that most organizations, most departments, most functions set goals using this particular technique which is called SMART goals. And SMART as an acronym stands for specific, measurable, agreed, realistic and time-bound goals which can be given to the employees. So here, if I say as an example to the sales manager that you have to achieve 5 million in terms of target or revenue this year, then what we are going to do is we are going to split that goal down, which is going to be put in the job description of the employee using SMART, as a strategy. So here, what I'm going to do is be specific. I'm being specific that I'm saying the stretch target is 5 million, but your minimum fail-safe target that you need to achieve to be able to hit your bonus is 4 million. So 5 is stretch, 4 is achieve bonus. Now, how is it measurable? Because what you will do is you will divide this target by 12 months, and you will say that if 4 million is to be divided by 12, you have to achieve, so much across, for example, in every month. And if you're looking at achieving a stretch, then you are looking at basically achieving, a certain percentage more, and you bring measurability to the target. What you will do is you will maybe set performance appraisals every 3 months to see if you're able to perform and meet that target or hit that goal. If you do not see it happening for 2 months, consecutive 3 months or 2 quarters, what you will do is you'll do a serious review and sit down that, okay, that is not happening. You're not going to hit that target. We are not going to hit the overall target. What you then do is you sit down, and also before this is done, you agree that whether you'll be able to do it or not. And if you are agreeing to doing it, what are the additional resources, requirements you have, which will help you achieve this target. And R is realistic. So if the last year the target was 2 million, and how can suddenly you achieve 5 million, then the target would be unrealistic. That means this is not something which can be achieved. You're asking for 100% growth. So if you were 100 last year and you want to go to 200, that might not be achievable because it's not a realistic target. So HR has to put targets in place using this terminology, which is SMART, and this is now used all across. And the reason why they are time bound is because this is related to the overall objective of the organization. And in this case, what tends to happen is if they are not tracked, that means if you do not see this happening month on month, then you have to put corrective action plan in place to be able to ensure that we achieve this. And if it's not being achieved, then you need to change the employee, fire the employee, or maybe give him more skills or training to be able to achieve it. And that is why all strategic targets that we set, and when we create a strategy, we depend on something called SMART goals. We look at goal setting, but the goal setting is done using this particular terminology called SMART. Is that okay?
Yeah, okay.
Now, there is another term that we also use, which is called KPIs, key performance indicators. Now, when the HR manager defines or they create a job description for a particular role, they also ask, say, I'm sticking to the example of a sales manager. The sales manager, when they define the role, the HR manager might not know what are the key criteria which have to be included to see that the performance is on target or in line with what is the requirement. So sometimes the HR managers will have a discussion with the line manager or the department head to say that, can you give me some key performance indicators to say that this employee is meeting the criteria, this employee is actually going to be hitting the criteria. And they could be things like, if he's putting an advert together or a job advert together, they would say, the department manager would give them some hints or points about key performance indicators. And they would be like, the person that you're trying to recruit or that I want in my team should at least have 10 years of experience. But apart from that, he will also say that the person should have relevant skills of working within the construction industry, should have worked within the top 3 of these industries or the competitors. Now, this is where he is giving out some specific requirements for the recruitment of that employee. Now, once that requirements are taken up by the HR, what they then do is they break it down into something called KPIs, and they then compare it with other sources of information to see if this is something which can be measured and is it realistic. And that is where the KPIs are then set in to bring people which are relevant for that particular role. So you will get to hear this term KPIs quite often, and KPIs are key performance indicators which are required because when you set goals or when you set targets, these targets and goals have to be in a way that they are realistic and there is a measurability around it when you define these KPIs. Now, KPIs can be a matrix. That means it is one of the performance measures used by managers to measure performance. And sometimes these KPIs could be the sales value, what is your output in terms of the target versus the achievement that you've done. The throughput could be units processed. So when you look at manufacturing factories, a lot of people who work on the manufacturing line, they are measured on the number of output in terms of units that they're able to complete or packaging they're able to do or the boxes they're able to ship. And this also relates to, depending on the industry and depending on the sector that we talk about, they might have an interpretation of KPI could also mean sales value. It could also mean an output. If it's a manufacturing company, a throughput would mean, again, related to production and engineering. Productivity could be, when you are in the services sector, how many calls the call center is making, what is the productivity. If you're an outbound call center and your task is to make 200 calls every agent has, okay, what is the productivity? How many, in those calls, how many of the 200 calls that a person makes every day are you able to actually connect to the customer, speak to the customer? It's not hung up on you, or the customer does not put the phone down, and that is looking at productivity. So KPIs can have different meanings, both from a point of view where it is applied and how it is interpreted. Is that okay?
Yeah.
KPI normally quantitative factors, but KPIs can also be qualitative factors. So when you look at people or staff working at the junior level, your KPIs are set quantitatively. That means they're number related. How many calls can you make? How much sales can you achieve? What revenue can you get? It is all quantitative, related to numbers. But when you look at KPIs at senior level or at the management level, KPIs tend to be qualitative. That means a product manager might be told that we need to achieve from 4% market share to 4.2% share this year. And that would mean in order to achieve that 0.2% rise in terms of a product manager might be managing, say, sales of a particular product, they would need to look at qualitative parameters to be given. Another example of qualitative parameters could be that, you know, our customer satisfaction levels this year are 95%. But what we want to do is for next year's performance, we want to achieve 98%. So you're also given numbers, but 98% is a base over how many calls, how many customers, we don't know. So you're qualitatively giving a KPI saying we need to increase our customer satisfaction ratio from 96 to 97% or 96 to 98%. And that is something which is qualitative. That means you're putting some sort of metrics in place which are related to KPIs, but it is not related to numbers directly, but it is related to improving the overall aspect of customer satisfaction. Is that clear?
Yes, it is.
And some of these could be, I could ask this question. Could you tell me that whether this is qualitative or quantitative KPI? So performance records in terms of sales, output, cost, is it qualitative or quantitative KPI?
Come again.
So if I ask you a question, when I set a KPI target which is based on sales or output or cost, is it a qualitative KPI or a quantitative KPI?
It should be quantitative.
That is correct, because it's related to numbers. If I say we need to look at quality of performance, we need to improve our accuracy in terms of, like, when you see people who work within the airline sector say that, we need to be having departures on time and, arrivals on time. And they say that last year, like Ryanair, the CEO of Ryanair, Michael O'Leary, which is a budget airline in Europe, he says that we have 96.4%, accuracy in terms of our departure and, arrival times. So he wants to improve that and take it to 98%. Is that qualitative or quantitative?
This should go with qualitative.
Qualitative, correct. So he is looking at setting an overall target. He's not defining how many flights, how many airports, how many arrivals, how many departures, but he's saying qualitatively we should be able to improve our landing times and flying times from 96 to 98%, and that's qualitative. So KPIs can be qualitative and quantitative, and this is a key terminology which is used in creating a HR strategy. Now let's look at some of the other elements of this strategy. And the slides which we can go through, because there have been some examples here. Now let's look at how do we look at aligning, something called performance and goals and objectives that we set to a particular strategy. Now, if we have to look at setting up a goal, what we want to be able to do is set a goal which is using SMART as a strategy, and that goal should be achievable overall for the employee and also for the organization. But if I set something quite big enough, then it becomes unrealistic, and that is not something which is achievable. So when we look at goals, from a company's point of view, the goals are always set, or from an HR strategy point of view, the goals are not set for a year, not for 3 months, 6 months, or 1 year. They are set normally for 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. Now, the reason why this is important here is that when we look at changes which are brought by strategy implemented by HR within the organization, it can have long-lasting effects. That means in some cases, this will lead to, things which are changing. Now, a simple example that I will try and give here would be, If you see an organization which is using Windows 7 as an example, and that is now changing to Windows 10, and the company has to change this across 10,000 PCs in, say, 5 offices across 5 different countries. Now, if this has to be done, you have to set a target wherein how this will happen in a phase-wise manner. So they might start with head office first, then go to a regional office, then go to another office, because it involves cost, time, effort, and then the HR perspective is to look at whether all employees are going to be effectively able to transition from Windows 7 to 10 or not. Will they require training? Will they require hand-holding? Will they require, development or a transition time to be able to go and achieve, the migration onto Windows 10? Now, that is what will be looked at when we look at, setting a target and aligning that target to a particular strategic goal. So you will say that we are going to migrate all the employees across all the PCs within 18 months to Windows 10. And the reason why you stagger that out in 18 months is because you want less disturbance. You want employees to be able to adjust. If they do not know the new software, they want to get training and development. And then at the end of it, this whole transition is going to be successful. So the idea when you start formulating a strategy is to look at understanding sometimes what could be the end result or the goal which could be achieved by putting that strategy into practice as well. So they have to look at aligning everything and then look at monitoring and reviewing it, because that involves money, cost, time, effort, training and development. And at the end of it, if that is not successful, then it will lead to a lot of wastage in terms of costs for the company. Is that okay? Now, if I look at this just generally, on a slide, and we look at alignment of goals, we have different types of goals with HR and within the organization. There are sometimes you look at corporate goals, there are functional goals, team goals, departmental goals, and individual goals. Now, each of these goals require different type of strategy. So when you look at HR strategy, what you will see is that all these strategies are a part of the corporate strategy. So when you look at corporate HR or head office making a strategy to do something in the organization, whether it's skill enhancement, whether it's reduction in the number of people employed, whether it's looking at cost savings in the organization, whether it's looking at moving the organization into a particular direction, all those will be a subset of smaller goals which are formed within the different parts of the organization. Now, an example which I had taken in the first learning outcome was, and I shared that using a website, was that British Telecom, BT, is actually deciding to make 13,000 of its workers redundant by 2020 in the UK. And the reason why this HR strategy has been put, or organizational strategy has been put into place, not HR, organization, corporate strategy has been put in place, is that BT feels that they have a workforce which does not have the right skill set to take the organization into the next phase of its growth. Because the way technology is moving, they have people who do not understand that, and they want to kind of lay off or make 13,000 such workers redundant, which cannot be a part of the vision of the organization up till 2025. But in return, what they are also saying is we are going to hire 6,000 employees. While the redundant hiring and firing continues, the net effect is going to be that 5,000 employees will lose their job. The reason why they are looking at this is they are looking at being influenced by factors like competition, like other companies in the market have manpower which is much more skilled. The requirements in terms of how the market will move, things like for what kind of services they will provide and what competition is introducing, they do not have the skill set to be able to offer those services. Sometimes they will see that the customer base is moving. That means a lot of people in the UK are no longer using landlines. They are only using mobile phones, and they need to have workforce which is much more skilled in selling mobile phones than selling landlines. And then sometimes they are also looking at legislation which is Brexit happening. That means Britain is leaving the EU. A lot of workers which are employed by the organization overseas and reside in overseas subsidiaries of the organization outside the UK might have to kind of end up losing their job because in order to sponsor them to work might be more expensive for the company than to hire local resources in the market in the UK. So sometimes you will see that corporate objectives are then kind of streamlined into other objectives within the organization, and the overall implementation of this strategy lies in the hands of HR department to ensure that everything works like clockwork, and they are the ones which go in and implement, monitor, and regulate how it is being implemented, what is the output, and measure the output. Is that okay?
Okay.
Now, going to one or two last things, I just want to kind of look at asking one or two questions in terms of what we've been able to do with understand HR strategy, how does it work, what it includes. And so let's look at, so in terms of if you are an HR manager and you are given this role of, working in the company as an HR person, what do you think you will need to perform in your role? What kind of skills, what kind of, what kind of experience, skills, and knowledge would you need to be able to perform in this role?
First of all, you have to understand what the organization, the organization's goal.
Yes.
So once you're able to understand the organization's goal, then and then also consider the characteristics, the organizational characteristics, so as to align yourself.
All right. Okay. That's fine. So basically, going back to if you are going to take up the role in the HR in an organization, you are looking at understanding the structure, the culture, the ethos, the ethics of the organization. Then you understand the people which work within the organization, and you get into understanding job descriptions, job characteristics, how people are working, what kind of department or role they are working in, what is the output required. You look at job description, job characteristics, and to a certain extent, you then also bring in your experience, your prior knowledge of working within HR, and then you relate it to things like SMART goals. You look at, overall strategy, what is the role that I'm going to do in the organization, what I'm going to accomplish, how review and appraisals will be done, and those are the knowledge and skills you will require to be able to effectively function in your role. Is that okay? So as a person working within the HR, what you're going to do is you're going to clearly look at how quickly you can understand the organization culture and structure, what is the impact of that culture and structure in the linkage, as you mentioned rightly, of the overall goal of the organization. That means what is the objective set, what is the overall plan for the year, and then how you're going to look at measuring that plan, monitoring that plan, and evaluating that plan is what you will see in your role. Is that okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
Good stuff. Now, any questions on this so far? Any questions on what we've discussed today?
No questions so far. Just would have to go through it again to be fully align ourselves with what you have taught so far.
That's fine. So
I would appreciate if you can send me the slides, because I missed out on so many things, because while you were talking and I wasn't seeing anything on my screen, I was lost in the process. So I'd appreciate if you send the slides.
That always you will get after the presentation. I will upload to Moodle as well. Now let's look at briefly understanding this unit's assignment brief. Now what we have to do, there are a few tasks which have been given, and there are 4 tasks that we have to look at. Now one of the tasks that we look at in order to understand the work which we've been doing in terms of writing as an assignment will be that in the assignment brief the organization scenario has been given. So you're assuming that a few years ago, Mr. Accelerate, a friend of yours, developed an iPhone app, and it has become very popular and it's sold to Apple for $4 million. So they've given you a bit of a scenario here and a structure of the organization. Now, basis this scenario, what we have to do is to attempt these tasks. 1, 2, and then 3, and this will become part of your assignment. So what I would suggest is, after you've gone through these slides, we look at how you will address these tasks. So maybe if you start putting a draft together, and that would mean that task 1 requires you to do a PowerPoint presentation, and in that PowerPoint presentation you are covering these tasks. So things like explain the importance of HRM with the context of Axel ATHE company, the company which is sold, or your phone is everything kind of tagline. You look at explaining the role of your as an HR manager, what is the role in the company, and then you look at picking up 2 or 3 factors of how you would do HR planning for this company. How would you look at resource planning for this company? So this has to be delivered using a PowerPoint presentation. The second talks about you assuming a scenario again that you've been given a contract, and this contract has been given that your IT is to look at creating a plan for the growth of the organization. So once it has been sold to Apple, your idea is to create a new HR plan to ensure how the organization will grow. And here you have to accomplish these tasks by writing, words, or basically doing a Word document. So it talks about how would you prepare a human resource plan for this organization. And then you have to write a memo or some sort of a letter, which is again a word letter, to explain the creation of this plan. So plan is nothing but policies and procedures that you've created. And what you have to do is, in the policies and procedures, you have to explain, like I sent you an employee handbook yesterday for UK employment, small kind of a version of, that handbook in 1 or 2 pages have to be created, which actually includes everything which the employees will get when they work within the organization. So things like, the perks, annual incentives, policies, and everything, legal legislation has to be covered. So you have to look at a very miniature form of the handbook, which has to be created, highlighting the importance of policy and how it needs to be, looked at. And the last part would be, in this case, you have to create a report which will talk about the impact of organizational structure and strategies on the management of HR. Because this was a small company and the company was very successful and was sold to Apple. So suddenly the employees in the organization have become a part of a multi-billion-dollar organization. So here, what are the strategies that you will put in place that we've discussed today in terms of the structure of the organization or the culture of the organization as an HR manager, that it helps the employees in the smaller setup of the organization adapt to the bigger policies and procedures of Apple as an organization. And here what you have to do is you have to do a bit of a small report to say that these are the changes which will happen, or these are the kind of changes which will be effected, which the employees will have to look at while they start working for a bigger umbrella organization like Apple, which has taken them over. So this is an assignment brief, which is a combination of things. It talks about a presentation, a bit of a Word document and a memo, and then again a Word document or a report, which allows you to address everything that we've covered within this particular unit of organization behavior as a strategic human resource management. Okay? So here what I'm going to do is, if I look at, just very briefly, if I look at Moodle, and then see the assignment brief is uploaded. So in the first one, what I'm going to do is close that. I'm going to quickly upload the assignment brief. So you can access from here, in short. There you go. So put the presentations here. So my session will be, after you go through the presentation today, the idea would be to start to look at the assignment brief and create a bit of a draft in Word document or a PowerPoint presentation and send it over for a bit of feedback. So I can give you some feedback if you're on the right path, you're able to pick up the right points to firm up that assignment. Is that okay?
Okay, when is it due?
Sorry?
When is the assignment due?
In 2 weeks. After we complete the unit, standard, draft should come in about 2 weeks to us for us to mark and review.
Okay.
Right? And in the meanwhile, what we do is we will start off with the other units. So for the Inca case, this was a common unit. You will be starting off with managing continuous change improvement. And in the case of the Inca, we're going to be continuing with unit 2. But you will start giving invites for the next unit, which is managing continuous change and improvement. First, because you are doing strategic management. In the case of Inca, we'll start off with the second unit, which is managing and coordinating HR resources. Okay?
Okay.
Good stuff. Any other questions that you have you want to